could use the time this afternoon earlier to kind of work on your own and then be able to report back to the group during this time. So this is kind of an open forum. Steph, did you have any specific way you wanted to structure it?
No, I just thought we could maybe go around like a round robin and just talk about what we did. I'm going to try to, you know me, I don't do well with like completely following directions and organizing the timer, but try to keep, you know, everybody within 4 minutes or so, but maybe just talk about what you did, what resource could be shared with the group. Just use this as an opportunity to kind of teach each other about things that you took away. Yeah, I'm happy to get started. I am trying to get back into reading. I have not been a good reader during the pandemic. I just can't stay focused. But one of the things that I told myself when I did a DEI workshop with one of our colleagues at the Vermont Lend was that I would, by the end of Lend, finish this text, which is, You Are Your Best Thing. And it is a collab between Brene Brown, who I've always loved since she's been out, and then Tarana Burke, who is the face of the Me Too movement. And it's the subtitle is Vulnerability, Shame, Resilience, and the Black Experience, an anthology. And so it's stories by all these fantastic folks whose images are on the back of the book, including Laverne Cox, who is a famous trans actress, and a number of other really just talented folks. And so I've tried to dig into that. I obviously didn't get it all read this afternoon, but it's one of those things that I really appreciate. Brene Brown kind of elevating the voice of Tarana, but also Ms. Burke being open to say, we have to kind of share in these experiences together across our racial differences. And so even just the intro was really powerful and kind of gave me some language to use, I think, particularly around just recognizing that as a privileged white woman, there's ways that I can be humble, and there's things that I can say and do to really just elevate the voices and take a step back for the people who have been historically excluded. So that just a little bit there, but it's a really good book so far. I highly recommend it. It wasn't a very good model. I didn't do 2 or 3 key takeaways, like I said, but just a little intro. Anybody else want to go next?
I can share.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. 3 of us jumped on it. Okay. I watched the documentary, the YouTube movie documentary. It was very intense at first, especially. I actually started it this morning, and I'm happy that I did because I was able to kind of stop it and take a break and then come back to it, which was very nice. If anybody hasn't watched it yet, I'll put out a little trigger warning. There are some pretty sensitive scenes as well as language, but I think the biggest thing I took away from that was just how deep these issues go. I had learned about ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is essentially a council where politicians and council members come together, and also big corporations like Walmart, for example, and State Farm come together, and they can talk about policies, which then some politicians may implement. And it gets into how some of these corporations benefit from these policies. And like an example was the prisons being overcrowded, and some of the healthcare agencies that are involved and profit off of that, and the people who supply food to the prisons and how they profit off of that. And then when the law about guns coming out and being okay to use if it's for self-defense coming out, and Walmart being the biggest gun supply chain in the world. And it just really, I think I always knew in the back of my head how deep it goes, but it's different when it's kind of thrown in your face like that. So I think that was definitely my biggest takeaway from the documentary.
I can kind of build on that, Kelsey, because I watched the documentary too, and I had seen like bits and pieces of it before, but I actually like took the time to just sit down and do nothing else but watch a movie, which is a lot hard for me because normally I'm doing the laundry or whatever else, but I really just want to like dedicate and focus on it. So I had a lot of takeaways, but I think I kind of narrowed all down to one thing at the end, which was literally like the last sentence that was spoken in the documentary. And it was about how the guy was, whoever he was, the guy was saying that a lot of people say to him, like, in the past, how did people deal with this? How did they turn a blind eye, or how were they okay with just going to like lynchings and things like that? And it really stood out to me when he said, like, well, people are still doing that today. And I was kind of like, holy shit, I do that. And this is something I've kind of recognized for a while now. And I think one of the big moments that it reminded me of when I was watching this, of when I recognized how much I was turning a blind eye and how much like of this privileged bubble I was being in, is the day where everyone on Facebook and Instagram and stuff was posting like the blackouts or the Black Lives Matter thing, and it was just like all completely black. And I remember thinking like, oh, everyone's doing this, I should probably do it too, to kind of join in and do what everyone else is doing. But I took a step back because I was like, well, why am I doing this? Like, I don't want to just do this because everyone else is doing it. I want to actually understand why I'm doing this and why it's important and why me posting something like this will actually make a difference. So yeah, I think my biggest takeaway is just that I think it's so easy to stay in this bubble of privilege. And oftentimes I kind of get caught up like, all right, this goes so deep. What can I, as one white person, do to fix this whole issue? And I kind of just realized like how big not turning a blind eye is, and by posting and by educating myself are like small actions that are actually super huge. So yeah, that was a summary of my thoughts while watching that movie.
And I apologize, we didn't really set this up as well, but thank you to Kelsey and Carolyn for kicking us off. But I just wanted to kind of frame it up like, just like anything else we do in Lend, really trying to go into this conversation with an open mind about learning something new from each other, and recognizing that if someone says something that doesn't land well, you know, to use our skills that we've learned in Lend about being an effective team member, and discussing either that with them in private, or kind of coming to one of us to say, hey, how should I approach this? I don't think, you know, that's going to be very common with this group, because I think you're all very open and honest and vulnerable with each other. But I realized that we didn't kind of set the stage for that. And Kelsey and Carolyn, thank you for just going to town and letting us know your thoughts on the movie. Maybe even if one of you wanted to go back, or if somebody else who chose to watch 13th wants to also just give a brief overview of the background of the film too, for those that didn't watch it.
I can try, and other people who watch it feel free to help. But it gives it's called 13th, based on the 13th Amendment. And I'm going to get the technical things all wrong, but it kind of gives a history of the way our justice system and prison systems have been used to just maintain just racist policies and structures in our country, and to criminalize specifically Black populations at rates far and above any other population. And they kind of just went through starting from when slavery was ended, and then some of the laws about prisons and that 13th Amendment came into place, and how it was built to kind of maybe replace some of the things that slavery had in place, as far as not giving people fair chances and keeping them in certain positions. And then just kind of goes through history of different big crime laws, like the war on drugs, or other big movements. There was one, the 3 strike movement. So I think it's if you have 3 either violent or felony crimes, then basically you're going to be in prison for life, and how that impacts people who are already given those charges for less offenses or falsely more so than people who are white. And I think that was kind of the big thing. And then just goes all the way through kind of the last few presidents and how some of their policies impacted that, and touched a little bit too on like at the border with immigrants and keeping immigrants into certain facilities and how that's kind of imprisonment in different ways too.
That was beautiful, Kate. That was a good summary of the movie.
It was fresh in my mind, so hopefully I did that. And I know that there are technical and a lot of pieces of that I missed. But I'll just briefly say the things that Kelsey and Carolyn talked about stood out to me too. I think one of the big things was that, I think I heard this correctly, that Obama was the first sitting president to visit a prison while in office. And that just says a lot, like how many people are probably making legislation on these issues who don't see every day or don't have to see every day the impact that it has, or have very much communication or exposure to the communities that it's harming. So I think that's impactful, and just thinking like, how do we get this video or things like this in front of more people to just continue to see what we can do to address it.
I can go next. I also saw the documentary and I think it was very impactful and hurtful at times too. And I had to stop and make a break. And then at the end, I was, inspired and understood a lot of the history of the US. And one of my first questions was, why I didn't get any of these in US history? I came here to the US like 10 years ago, and I thought it was because I went to a community college and maybe education is not good. So I talked to my Caucasian husband and he's like, no, it's just because we want to forget that these ever happened because we are ashamed of it. So I had to reach out to my Black friends. And I was like, how can I help? And I think it was even more powerful talking to them because you hear a lot of times it's like treat people how you want to be treated and, go for their causes, but maybe it's different from them. And I want it to be from their perspective. And I don't know, I think each conversation was more painful. And I don't know. I a lot of times I also think I had a lot of guilt because when I heard, in the documentary said, until every Black life matter, not like the other ones, until we value that, then we weren't going to understand that all the other lives matter. And at some points when I was hearing these before, like in the years that I've been in the US, I never understood because I was like, everyone is equal. We all should be treated the same. Why are we, like doing this? And the documentary kind of pointed and that. And one of my best friend actually is Black, and she told me, I was talking to her about it. And I'm sorry, I'm going kind of long, but I think this is really impactful. Maybe it will remind you guys of why all of these matters. But she was like, when I was pregnant, I didn't want to find out that I have that it was a boy or a girl. But as soon as I delivered, I got my baby and it was a boy, and I started crying and saying, no, I hate it. And I always was hopeful that my baby was a boy, it was a girl, because I don't know what is gonna happen to him as he grows. And I think all of these was just very eye-opening to me and to the US history. And I did a couple things. I reached out to my white family, to my in-laws, and made them watch these because they're pretty Republican, and everyone actually called me back and said, we never knew about these incarceration things. Thank you for these. And the other thing that it was very impactful was how they're shifting the legislation and all this stuff of mass incarceration to immigrants. So I know that all the stuff that happened in the borders and, incarceration of the kids and all of that, and how we're shifting gears just because of money. And that was very kind of, distressful. And yeah, I really appreciate you, Steph and Jen, for like putting this in the curriculum, because it was very eye-opening. And yeah, Risha and Pat, I don't think I have the right words to say anything about all of these, but you have an ally here, and thank you for going through all of that and sharing with us however we can help.
I watched the documentary also, and my big thing was the fear I have as a parent for my two boys. Like my 15-year-old, he wants to walk home from school, which seems like a normal thing for you guys, but not for him, because I don't know if something's going to happen. Too many black boys get, pulled over for nothing in jail, and that's something we deal with every day. My 22-year-old, he told me, he said, I'm going to deliver DoorDash. I said, no, you're not. I said, a lot of black people do it, but you don't know what neighborhood you're going to go into. You're a big black guy, and we shouldn't have to feel that way, but we do. But what stood out to me was when Clinton apologized for his big bill, but he did nothing to, rectify what he did, And then when they were talking about crack and cocaine, crack was, that was the black person's drug, and they get all these sentences. Like now with meth, meth is killing a lot of white people. So all these drug dealers really should be selling drugs, getting all these tough sentences because of that, So it really struck me in a lot of different ways, Even the prison system.
I just wanted to point out for the people that didn't watch the movie too, I think Risha was saying at the end, they were talking about in the documentary when crack cocaine started coming out, if a white person was caught in possession, they'd get a slap on the wrist. If a black person was caught with possession, they would spend who knows how much time in prison. And I also wanted to point out for those who didn't watch, I'm going to get these percentages wrong, but I think it was like 6% of the male population is made up of black males, yet in prisons, black males make up 40% of the population. I might have those numbers wrong, but the point of it was, of the males in prison compared to the males in our population, black men, it's not even close to comparable, the ratio of black men in prison compared to white. So I don't know if anybody else who didn't watch the movie was confused or not, but I think that's where a lot of this fear is coming from for raising your boys.
Going off of that number, sorry guys, I joined a little late because of my kiddos, so I don't know what all was said, but off of that number, because I literally have it written down, was that 1 in 17 white men will have a likelihood of imprisonment, and yet it's 1 in 3 for black men. Numbers hit me hard, so the numbers that they provided in that documentary, it's almost all numbers in my notes. And then watching that progression of numbers, and then in 2000 there's 2 million, but 878 of that 2 million were African American. Like, that just blew my mind. I had all kinds of feelings. I had a lot of very, very strong feelings in that video, in that documentary.
Christy, I was thinking the same thing, and kind of what Kelsey said too. My notes are all numbers and just the divide between how many African American men are in prison was shocking. And I feel guilty and sad for some of the things that I've done as like a privileged white lady in society. And thinking about this movie and watching 13th was super eye-opening to sit there and, you know, take it and stop the film. But I was really drawn to the numbers as well as the lyrics to some of the songs. And so I had some closed captioning on to kind of take note of what they were saying. And I think that, you know, music is so tied to culture, right? So kind of what are they singing about? And one of the song lyrics was like, trying to put me in chains, don't act like you're saving us, but you're blaming us and that we're still in chains today. So, you know, people are like, oh, kind of what Carolyn said, like slavery, you know, back then, and now we're talking about history. Well, we're still doing like the same things. And I think just the music in 13th really spoke to some of the main themes. So if you haven't watched it, go back and look at some of those musics and lyrics parts, because they really provide a good synopsis and just kind of what people were feeling as they were living those times.
I know I
Risha
already
too,
thought-
I wanted to say, like, hearing you talk about that whole not wanting your son to walk home is such a difficult thing for me to process, because I walk to and from school every day of my childhood life, and I never once had that thought pop into my mind. I had the thought of don't let a man in a white van come near me, but other than that, we didn't have these large warning conversations, or I don't feel like my mom thought like that. And so even becoming a mother now, that weighs very heavy on me to hear that thought process, that extra weight of every day having that. That like, I'm like, oh, that's.
It's just like they said in the film, I watched it also, that being white, we can't walk in Megan's, Pat, or Raisha's shoes. We don't know what it's like. I mean, we can sit in a restaurant and literally, or walk anywhere and see people, as an African American person walks past them, they hold their purse a little tighter, or they hold onto their child a little bit closer. And a lot of it, I believe, like Andrea is saying, is education. This film, I know there's words, there's graphics, but growing up in my age in grade school, we read about slavery. We never saw pictures. We never saw the lynchings like they show in this. And maybe that's something education wise everybody needs to see at least once. Middle school, high school, I know you have to get parent approval, but just to have the education. And then I also thought of the presidents who put in, you know, these laws about we're going to do better at 3 strikes and you're out and all this stuff against what they call criminals. But instead, why didn't you take that money and go out there into the community and talk to the community, get the police? You funded the police, but it was to go out and arrest people instead of trying to educate the police on how to handle a situation. More training, more something, where you hear other countries, their police officers are in training for a year before they're put out there. Ours are trained for 8 weeks. I don't think that's enough with what's going on. So that's what I kind of took from that.
Yeah, Donna,
Comments
that's
on the education. You go ahead, Julie.
okay. And Nicolette, I think we're going to probably talk about the same thing. I thought the same thing about the education. Like, it was surprising to me that all the policies went more towards punishment versus going into the community and educating them on how not to do this. And it was, somebody mentioned this before, it was really interesting to watch like the correlation of like when drugs get introduced or, you know, kind of like become popular, how that affects the prison system and people going to prison. And so, but I do think Andrea brought up an interesting point. Like, you know, I've gone to school in the United States. Hold on one second. Hold on. Go. And I didn't learn most of like this about the prison system. Like, this was all news to me. So, you know, it's just shocking that we've lived here and we just don't know that this is happening.
Yeah, you took some of what I was going to say. And that's one thing I do remember. And I wish I remembered specifics, but in elementary school, we actually took a tour of a prison. But the thing is, like, I don't remember specifics on it. I just remember us going through this prison and like, what did we actually get out of it aside from don't end up here, you know, like make smart choices, that kind of thing. But the other thing that hits me with the education system is, yes, I grew up here on the west side of Cincinnati, where it's predominantly white. And then I went to college in Cleveland at Case Western, where 2 blocks away, you go from privileged college students and Case Western, Cleveland Clinic, university hospitals and everything, to what we considered the ghetto, where the Taco Bell had bulletproof glass and still got robbed. And like the fast food places were like banks. And one of the best things I ever got to do in college, which really showed me a lot of the stark differences in the education and whatnot that people have been talking about, was we had a system where we got to go out and help kids with science fairs. And we got to go to the white neighborhoods and like the more rich, privileged children. And we also went into the depths of the neighborhoods that were predominantly African-American, minority students, and seeing the stark difference of security, of how they treat their students, how they can get dropped off, like Risha is saying, and just the kids that can walk, can't walk, the support to and from school, the support at school was so different and so amazing. And then you get to the regional science fair, and it's like these kids that are in these lower areas are never going to be able to compete in some ways with these other privileged kids that have all the money, finances, support. And just seeing stark contrasts to that, I think plays a lot of what was discussed with everyone here.
I also watched the documentary, and I had a lot of similar takeaways in my notes to things that have been said, but something that I don't think we've touched on yet is kind of the media. And I think that a lot of times it's portrayed as the media is like a new problem. And we think of it like now because of our phones, and maybe we have more access to it. But I was just so taken aback by the movie Birth of a Nation in 1915. And it had a whole political agenda to just villainize Black people. And it's just like been that way ever since. And then I think it's also kind of, you see that on the documentary at first, and you kind of think, oh, like how much impact is a movie, you go to the theater, like that's a movie, it's not real life. What impact does that have? And then I started like really reflecting personally. And I know one thing we talked about was the high rates of, showing Black men being arrested on the news. And I grew up in an area outside of Philadelphia, completely white. I just middle class. I did not grow up with a lot of diversity. My parents were from very rural environments where they grew up, my grandparents, so like no diversity we were exposed to. And the only thing we saw on the news was Philadelphia was the urban area where there was crime. And of course, thinking back on it now, the only crime they showed was amongst Black people either being arrested or, some kind of violence. And so I've definitely just grown up thinking like urban equals bad, the Black neighborhoods equal bad. And it's really embarrassing to kind of say that out loud. And I was definitely nervous to move to Cincinnati because I didn't know what it would be like. And that is entirely embarrassing to say. But, I think I've come a ways, but I think it's a lot to go through still. Like I have wonderful neighbors and great friends who are willing to really educate me and help me understand and talk with me about hard things. So I'm very fortunate for that. But it's just a reminder that these are things that as privileged white people, we have to combat every day. So our upbringing, the things that we see on media, it's not just something that, okay, we talked about it, we learned today, I'm good now. It's like every day we'll always have to work on this. So really enjoyed the documentary.
I think that's really helpful, Courtney, to frame up. And I just want to, based on some of the things that the folks, that are white have shared, is this idea of what's happening right now. And even at Cincinnati Children's, the diversity, equity, inclusion, justice work that's being done is honestly having us all go through history again with what really happened, right? Instead of it being whitewashed the way that it was, portrayed to us. And I think a lot of that is sitting with the feelings of embarrassment and shame and discomfort, and being okay to elevate the voices of others around us, to allow them to have the space that they've never had before. And I think, there's so much more work to be done. But when I, again, going back to your point about the media, when I hear things of, people in certain school districts around the country banning books or not wanting to teach real history because it would make white people feel uncomfortable. I mean, we have to take a stand against that. We're going to continue to exacerbate a healthcare system that has white people as the doctors and Black people as the patients, and that don't trust the white doctors, because they're going to be continually elevated to the highest positions and leadership. So that I wanted to say. And then the other comment is, I can't remember if anybody on here was on the Afterly Echo last Friday. I don't know if Angel joined or anybody, but we talked a lot about just the differences in cultures in the way in which we take care of ourselves. And it reminds me of this conversation too, in that in America, we are so on the spectrum of, community is valued versus individualism is valued. And that is kind of going back to this prison system idea of, oh, you are in control of your body and you are a criminal, so you should go to prison or jail or be held accountable, versus the community is completely ruled out in that situation, that nothing in the community is potentially building you up, right? Nothing is supporting you. And so I think that there's that piece of the US culture that many of us that have been grown up here and educated here, it's ingrained in us that when you do something wrong, it's on you. When you do something right, it's on you. But really, many other cultures from throughout the world focus on that collectivist culture of, we just build everybody up. And when we all fail, when one person fails, we all fail. And I love that Pat has brought us back to that idea around teamwork, but it's a cultural piece that doesn't quite match with US culture and leadership development and power hierarchies. So I also kind of wanted to throw that in there too, as we're thinking through just what are we ingrained in terms of individualism versus collectivism. Go ahead, Amber.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on some of what Courtney talked about, also kind of follows what I wanted to mention, and maybe kind of also flows into what you were talking about, Steph. But I did not watch the documentary, so this has been really interesting to listen to everybody's comments about that. But I was on the website for the museum that we would have gone to, and just explored a lot of the exhibits that they had posted and read through different stories. And that was really powerful, and it was really cool. I appreciated all the pictures they had of real, different artifacts or letters or things that they had found from the Civil War era or World War II or different time periods, kind of showing personal stories of people who dealt with being enslaved or who lived during that time period. So they're pretty easy to read through. I'd recommend maybe just picking one and looking, because they were really cool. But one of the things that I found really powerful was a lot of them, they were very specific, because it was here's a story of this person and they lived in this location, and then, they traveled here, and you could see things from their life. And just because they're the locations that they were mentioning were so close to here. And also right now my boyfriend lives in Mississippi, and so there was a lot of places that they mentioned, and I was I've been there, I know what that is. I've driven on that road. I didn't know that was a slaving road. This is just, it was really disconcerting to me to know that I've been to those cities and those been on those roads that were created to basically just spread slavery even further. So I grew up when I was a kid living in Northern Illinois and then South Texas, and so just neither of those places are places where slavery was on the ground that I was walking on. So I thought it was really powerful to think about the fact that like these stories were not that long ago, and they were in the places where I'm living right now and have been right now. And kind of like Courtney was talking about, was just sort of a really big awakening to like, it's easy, like when I was growing up in Illinois and learning about slavery, and oh, this happened in the South, and it's like, well, we were the Northerners, so we were on the good side or whatever, you know. And then it's like, wait a minute, like it's not like I'm on the good side by growing up in the North. Like, so it was just a good reminder of like, this wasn't I think I'm like not phrasing this well, but this wasn't like a North versus South, which I think at least the schools in the North kind of frame it like the North was good, like the South was bad, but like it's really more white versus black. And like just a good reminder of the privilege of being white, instead of thinking that you get out of being a part of that just for being a Northerner, if that makes sense to everybody. So I thought that was really just impactful for me. And I also wanted to comment really quick on, I was reading through the conversation going on in the chat about just the prevalence of drugs and how that has caused so much imprisonment. And I volunteered at a prison, or a local county jail, not a big institutional prison, but a couple years ago. And the ladies that I worked with, like I'd say 95% of them were there for drugs. And it was really just terribly sad, because they would get out and get back in, get out, get back in, just from drug use. And it was just, yeah, heartbreaking to see that cycle and no one there to stop it. So just a little add-on that I agree that is more of a healthcare crisis than maybe a prison.
I also looked through the virtual exhibits for the museum, because I had seen 13th when it had just come out. And I agree with Amber. I thought that they were some really powerful exhibits that you could look at online. But there was one that I thought was kind of problematic, and it was about this former slave named Rachel and her experience like growing up in this house and working with this family. And so it's like virtual slides. So you scroll through and you can look at all the pictures, and they have pictures of like the home and of the family and things like that. And they had a picture of a letter from one of her owners. And so like the whole caption for the picture was like, this is a glowing account of Rachel's character, and like, look at all these nice things that her owner wrote about her. And then if you actually read the letter itself, it's just like 3 or 4 sentences. And one of the quotes from it is that like the owner commends her as a well-trained, efficient, and reliable domestic. Like that is labeled as a glowing account of her character. And at no point is it mentioning her character or anything about her as a person. It's just, look how great of a slave she was, which to me, like, again, you know, coming from a background of incredible privilege as a young white male, the fact that made me like angry, that was like, that's not at all like a comment on character. That's just like saying that she was really good at her job as or not even a job, her role as a slave. I can't even imagine like coming from that background of you know, that systematic and historical oppression, and seeing like those two completely contradicting statements on the same page in a museum. I also thought it ties a lot back to 13th, because it says that, you know, she was emancipated in 1865, but then she stayed with the family and kept working for them until she died in 1906. So that's another 41 years that even though she was free, she was still like in the same position, still working for the same family. And I know it's been about a year or two since 13th came out, and since I saw it, but like that's one of the main themes of the documentary, is that you create this system where people are kind of stuck and they can't get out. And even though you are released from jail and you've served your time and you've done whatever punishment has been given to you, like you're still kind of stuck in that same cycle and you're still oppressed and you still can't move upwards. And it's exactly what happened in this case. And it's like the perfect allegory for how the prison system is just like slavery 2.0, where you're just creating this system of oppression.
So I've seen the 13th, but I am currently reading a book that actually my university has given me called "The Political Determinants of Health." And I'm like kind of slowly getting through it. But my partner works at a maximum security prison in Ohio. And so she kind of sees all of the inequities that are there. And she always asks me, like, what's the prevalence of X disability in the general population? Because she has found that most of the inmates that she serves have comorbid disabilities. And we looked up articles this afternoon because she was home just out of curiosity. And we found an article from 2015 that surveyed over 11,000 inmates of color and over 23,000 inmates without any racial identity associated with it. And they found that 41% across all inmates have some sort of disability, and of their disabilities, 26% were untreated or not had rehab or intervention as a child that they can recall. And so I think that gets back to, like Maria said in the chat, like you can't like put a band-aid on that. There's no band-aid solution. It's a system working against a population, and many of those inmates in that study were also from lower SES status, regardless of race. And so if they are from lower SES status with a disability, I can't even imagine the lack of resources that were already in place. And it's so interesting because my girlfriend comes home all the time telling me about, she is a social worker by trade and working as a correctional officer right now because she wants to fully understand the experience in order to, she's a better person than I am and I commend her every day. But she wants to understand the system, and like she always comes home and she's like, it's so broken and there's so many things we could have done to prevent X person that I've gotten to know from getting to where they're at. And I think that just, I've seen the 13th and I'm reading this book on the political and social determinants of health, and there are so many policies that are in the way of a solution.
Going off what Sam said and echoing James and Amber, I really liked also what Kelsey put in the chat, because it was something I really noticed when watching the documentary, was how they mentioned how important human behavior is and why don't we have teachers and therapists helping in the prison system. And Kelsey mentioned like getting a job and feeling a sense of belonging. And as an occupational therapist, that is one of my areas of specialty that I could help. And there wasn't anything in my schooling that taught me about that, or any experiences going to prisons. Yes, I could go to the hospitals, I could go to schools, but I didn't have an opportunity to go to a prison and learn about what I could be doing to help the system. And I thought that was just really impacting for me to see those videos and to see what is going on in the prisons. And there's no proper treatment to truly maybe impact them to make them successful when they come out of there. And it's just a vicious cycle. And I know like this is just the first step of talking about it, but like in my head, I was sitting here like, I would love to go back to my school and be like, why isn't this an option? How can we make it an option? And I'm just really grateful for this experience. So thank you, Steph and Jen, for making it happen.
I know I talked a lot, so I'll keep this short, but I just wanted to point out, Carolyn said in the chat, pointed out like the disabilities that people kind of obtain in a way while they're in prison. And the movie had talked about a Black man who was wrongly accused and had to spend time in prison while he was waiting for his trial and waiting for a decision to be made. And he ended up being found not guilty. And during that time that he spent in prison, when he should never have been in there in the first place, he was fighting with guards and with inmates. And really could have gotten a lot more charges when he shouldn't have been in there in the first place. And when he was finally let out of prison, he eventually committed suicide because of the depression that he underwent while he was in prison. So I don't know, just think about that.
Kelsey, can you guys hear me? Sorry, this mask is like, okay, sorry. And if it's loud, I'm sorry, I'm in the health science building, but that is a really good point. And while I was watching, I've watched the documentary before and I've did a little bit of my own research. And if anyone hasn't read White Fragility, I highly recommend it in terms of kind of just encountering your own bias, whether it's like generational bias or just, continuing to be diligent of it. But I'm part of a death penalty abolition restorative justice advocacy group. And it kind of came about because I have a passion for just like combating infant mortality, specifically Black infant mortality. That's what my undergraduate research was in, but like looking at it from a different perspective and how Black men are a majority or like disproportionately receive capital punishment at a disproportional rate to like white men, and recognizing that some men who are not even guilty of the crimes that they're being accused of, and like getting a capital punishment, there's just so much injustice there, and like some go to prison for like 20-30 years, and then because of evidence or DNA testing or whatnot, they find that they're actually not guilty of that crime, and kind of going back into society and recognizing that like we've done such an injustice, and capital punishment, it shouldn't even be we shouldn't even use capital punishment anymore. It's so barbarian to me, but like just like coming to terms with that and actually hearing from some people that have been on death row and like recognizing that have been a majority of like Black men and hearing their stories, it's something that like as a white person, it's important to hear, as difficult as it can be to hear. And like in my social work curriculum, I have to take a diversity class. And like last year we had to write a paper on like a population that we would be uncomfortable working with. And the teacher, who was a Black professor, talked about how the majority of white students did not bring up race. Like I think 80% of students didn't talk about like a population that they would be uncomfortable working with are like just people of color, and recognizing that like sometimes it's even difficult for us to like confront it and like say it out loud and like learn and all that. So I appreciate that you said that, because I think it's important.
Shannon, I really like the one point you just said that white individuals really need to kind of lean into that discomfort for like learning about this stuff. So I watched 13th again. I first watched it when it first came out. James mentioned, I think it was a year or two ago. Time has been weird since the pandemic started, but I watched it again, and I would actually recommend to a lot of people rewatching it, because I felt like I caught a lot of things that I missed the first time. And just remembering like how hard it is to watch. Some people are living and thinking about that every day, and like being privileged, like I don't maybe necessarily have to think about it all the time. And yes, I'm upset when I'm watching the video, but like I still need to lean into that so I can understand. So that was my first thought. But I also have when I did a clinical at the James Cancer Center at Ohio State during my graduate career, and I actually got to provide intervention to a few people who had come from the prison system that needed chemo treatment, who needed radiation treatment. And it was so impactful for me, because as I was making my therapy plan of care recommendations, I was saying, oh, well, they should walk this much a day and they should use their walker. And I remember talking to my clinical instructor, they're like, they can't have a walker. And I'm like, they can't, like they can hardly walk without an assisted device. And it was just really impactful thinking about the necessary health interventions that were kind of being kept from them. And it was just really, really eye-opening to me as a young physical therapist. And that's definitely in an area where I think needs to be improved, both for mental health and physical health in the prison systems, and making sure people are getting cared for, because that just seems crazy to me that you wouldn't be able to have it. And finally, I just want to give out a shout out to the book, The Secret Life of Henrietta Lacks. I don't know if any of you guys have read it. It's about a Black woman in, I forget what time period. She had cervical cancer, I believe. And doctors took cells from her body during a surgery without her permission. And since then, if you've heard of HeLa cells, they're used in a lot of research labs. My fiance even uses it in his cancer research labs, is one of the main things that they use to study human cell research. And the family of Henrietta Lacks never received reimbursement, really never, again, was never even asked if this was okay. So I think there's like millions or billions of her cells around the world now. And there's really never been retribution to the family and like justice. So everyone in the healthcare system, or even if you aren't patient facing, definitely look into that book, because it really helped me understand, or maybe begin to start to digest kind of Steph, what you were saying, like the distrust in the healthcare system, and just really eye-opening for me as a healthcare provider.
Well, I'm actually
going to second that. Sorry, Pat. That's just a great book and a great movie. So definitely,
oh, go ahead.
If you're in healthcare, yeah, just make sure to read that. We had to read it before we actually used HeLa cells in my undergraduate lab. We were required to read the book, and then I watched the movie. But it's incredible to read, and you can actually find multiple, like her family does different speaking events, and you can find some virtual ones now. I think I attended one like in last February. So you can definitely Google that. Right.
Actually, I was going to address, I actually started reading the book Medical Apartheid. And I had heard her, the author, I think she did a grand round, a children, she was a part of a grand round. And so I got the book, and this book actually should be definitely a part of graduate level readings. It really should, because if you're in healthcare, any aspect of healthcare, because it actually starts to address the thinking that was deeply rooted in healthcare by health professionals, and including the AMA, American Medical Association. It is very heavy in historical account. And so if there's a point that's being made, she doesn't just cite one individual, she cites multiple individuals that substantiates what she's saying. I had to put it down several times because it was so heavy and steeped in history. And so it's not a book that you can just sit down and just read it all the way through, like for a weekend. I started to have to highlight different sections of it. And then, I had to start being a little bit more selective, because there were so many things that were standing out that I would have been marking the whole book up. But everything that you all have touched on is rooted. It actually, the beginning, the seed of it, you'll read about it in this book. So basically what you all are talking about, as I was listening, it's the symptom of the organism that started it all. And so I wanted to read just this real quickly, this one sentence. And it said, this was written by two physicians. One of them was Dr. Josiah Knott, and the other one was George Glidden. And they wrote a book called The Types of Mankind. And so this is what they wrote. They said in it, they claimed that Blacks' physical and mental differences signaled their polygenic origins and proved Black inferiority. For example, Knott, who was a physician, Josiah Knott, theorized that the distinctive knee joint and long heel of the Black man proved he had been created as a submissive knee bender, a servant to whites. So throughout the book, and I've only gotten through the introduction, which is almost as long as 2 chapters, and 3/4 of the first chapter. I haven't even gotten to the rest of it. And the book is 405 pages or so. But so far throughout it, she's actually identifying what the thinking has been and as to why there are still thoughts about African Americans or Blacks, even still to this day. And you say, no, that probably was just during slavery times or maybe in the 1960s. Less than a year ago, a white primary care physician said to me that he is afraid of Blacks. He said, I'm not afraid of you when you're by yourself, but if there's a group, I'm afraid. I was so much in shock. I just looked for a few minutes. I couldn't believe that in 2021, someone actually made that statement to me. And my first thought was, how is that influencing you with the delivery of healthcare to someone who looks like me? So I've only gotten to the very, very beginnings of this. And this actually, she's showing that this goes back before the Tuskegee syphilis. This is going back into the 1700s. And she's actually showing where this is very deep rooted. And it's not just one example, 2 examples. Oftentimes there are multiple examples, which is why you can't just keep reading it. So I encourage you, if you're planning on going into research, or if you have a hope to work with people who are of color, this book, Medical Apartheid, is definitely a must read. And she mentioned in it also another book is called Bones in the Basement. And it talked about what happened to Blacks after they died, how many of their bodies were exhumed and used in research, dismembered and used in research. And because that was not an acceptable thing to do during that time, meaning dismemberment, not necessarily dismemberment of Blacks, but dismemberment, the bones, when they were finished, they were buried in the basement of a building. And it was later found when they were either remodeling or, and that's how they found out. And a large, over 50% of the bones were people of color. I don't remember the exact number. But if you're interested in how and why people of color are concerned about surrendering decisions to a physician or healthcare provider who doesn't look like them, or hesitant toward research, she gives, and I believe she is a social worker, she's a medical social worker. She gives an account of just how the mentality has been toward people of color. So it's definitely a must read. It's called Medical Apartheid.
I can say something from a different perspective, just because I don't know much about American politics and the legislation, and I wasn't educated. Like, I don't know the American education system. I was raised in the Dominican Republic, but going to a French school, so I was in a mainly Black country, living as a middle class white privileged woman with a French education. So that is mostly what I know. So it was very instructive to see this documentary as a whole, and discovering something that, not really discovering, but actually like how good the government and the politicians are good at covering up and actually like cloaking their actual real intentions, and all the loopholes that were made around the 13th Amendment, and how upsetting that was. So I resonate a lot with Andrea and Christy with how, and Courtney also, like how I felt very angry watching the documentary. I felt very ashamed also. And
just very helpless, like what can I do? So all I kept thinking is like, I am one person, but what can I do really? And I still don't know, but I'm just putting it out there that if there is anything that we can do, because I did grow up thinking, well, everyone is a person. We all should be treated the same. So why are we treating so differently? Like you're treated as criminals. You're not even seen as a human being, to the point where not only white folks were the ones that were seeing them as dangerous and criminals, but also Black themselves, as for what I could tell understood in the documentary. So that was interesting and upsetting. And I also really liked the last sentence of the documentary where they mentioned that it's still happening today. And I actually talked about it with my boyfriend, who's like, yeah, it still happens today. And I didn't realize it that it was so prominent, because we did residency in New York. He's from Ecuador and I'm from DR, so we come from a Latin American background. But then we went in residency in New York, and everybody that we saw doing like the hard work, very hands-on, heavy duty kind of stuff were mostly Latinos. So that's what we saw in New York. And coming to the Midwest, both of us, if he's in Cleveland and I'm here, and we see that it's a lot of people of color, then it kind of created more impact, if that makes any sense, because I knew it was out there, but then I hadn't seen it that much. So yeah, that I may have rambled a little bit, but that's just me. Elodie, you made a comment and it came up in the documentary I watched, the 13th, and it was a woman speaking, and she was saying, they were talking about me and I started to like believe in the media what they were saying was true about me. And I just was so like shaken by that things that are spoken over a community in the media and by other people become true for them, to the point that people that are being criminalized are starting to believe that about themselves. And I just think that was shocking, but we see it play out in our field and every other aspect of life. And so why doesn't it make sense when somebody's speaking something over a child? We see that play out in poor ways for children. And so just having the perspective that the things that we say matter and the things that we speak over people matter, and that we do have a role in what words come out of our mouth and how valuable and important that they are. And I think we have the opportunity, just, the 25 of us, to change our language around all of this, because it matters, and because what is said is what people believe about themselves. And it was just pretty terrifying that a young child could be watching the news and hear, this is what you are because of your race, and start to believe that about themselves. And I think that it's been generations of that being true.
Angel, I'm really glad that you brought up this idea, or not idea, but this about kids and how kids are impacted. So imagine that child watching that and thinking that about themselves, and then think about the other group of like white kids who have people actively trying to prevent them from learning this information in school, with regards to critical race theory. And I just wanted to bring this up as a topic of conversation, especially for those of you who have kids who are in school. I'm curious kind of what you've heard about critical race theory, and also a bigger concern, not a bigger, but a large concern that I have as well, is that the same folks that are really fighting against critical race theory are also fighting against mental health programs in schools and social emotional learning. And, you know, it seems like it's all tied together just from the standpoint of like not wanting their kids to be brainwashed and indoctrinated. I just wanted to put that out there to see kind of what you guys have heard, either as parents or as professionals, because I think it's really important, because that's where we can have an impact, I think, too. And what we can do is kind of keep educating adults and kids. So gonna.
I'm not a parent, but my sister is an elementary school teacher she taught in Illinois and now is teaching in Houston, Texas. And she is not allowed to teach critical race theory because it erases Texas and American history as it is currently written. And that is like in the email written out to her. She forwarded it to me and was like, so I'm not allowed to teach critical race theory, and because it erases Texan history, and there's a lot of politics in that state in general. But like, she is also not allowed to answer certain questions on like race and history that is not taught. And she's supposed to like defer to her principal and defer to like the kids' parents, because she works at a private school, and it's quite common that parents will ask what kind of critical race theories are being taught to their children. Basically kind of what you're saying, like they just kind of think they're being brainwashed in whatever way. So
I think what's challenging for me is the idea that critical just means critical thinking, just means thinking in a way that you can see multiple sides. And this is the same argument that many folks on that side or other sides say that young people don't have critical thinking skills, right? So millennials, Gen Zers, like we all got brought up and we don't have critical thinking skills. Well, we're removing this as an opportunity in our education system to think critically about issues of intersectionality. And ultimately, that is where I see critical race theory as just being a way in which that we start to build those foundations of seeing how things overlap in our complex system versus just memorizing a bunch of stuff like I know I did out of a textbook, right? But thinking critically about it. And that's where I think just breaking it down that simply for some people can be helpful. It's not anything to do with indoctrinating. It's just teaching kids how to think for themselves and collect information and data and challenge their own way of thinking.
Evan, I agree with what you're saying, and kind of looking at it as an outsider with like what Elodie also said. I still feel that Americans, the older Americans, are afraid of what happened, and they don't even know. Like my mother-in-law is like 60, 65. I'm like, I didn't know this happened. And she still's like using sometimes the N-word, and we get in big arguments, and it's just something nasty that I see that happens. And like the older American population that are not able to admit and be educated about what happened. So that fear is what drives them to make, unfortunately, these legislations, because white men are the ones who are in those positions, creating all these things for boards of educations. And, you know, I don't know. I was talking with one of my mentors about these over the weekend too, and telling her, what do we do? And it's like, well, we get engaged in voting. You know, I think there was a bill that happened here in Cincinnati about, what was it? Felonies and just carrying so much amount of marijuana on you. And if that happened and they get you and then you go to prison for that amount of time, and that's going to be in your record, and then you cannot have a decent job. And so I think, I don't remember who it was, but someone was, I think Angel was saying about how do we do these? And I think that's what resonates with all of us is, how do we change the system and how do we help them? And I think as young people, I've noticed that people don't think that we have a difference, but voting and educating our elders about the power that we have in our hands when it comes to these matters, it's what is gonna change and break the wheel, because otherwise this is gonna perpetuate.
This is like a bigger topic, I guess, and it might open up a can of worms, but just kind of made me think about going back to the media. I feel like actually Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and even TV shows that a lot of people in our generation watch have gotten a lot better about just kind of showing all sides and bringing up things in a real light. And then I feel like news stations haven't made as much progress. And maybe that's just certain things that I walk in the room and I see my dad watching and I'm like, what are you watching? You know that this is not correct, right? And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong and maybe I just don't watch enough actual TV and I'm always just on social media. But from what I've seen, I feel like that is a big reason why older generations, my dad included, are less educated, because so many of the news channels are so biased still and don't always portray all of the facts, and neither does our social media. But I think that the social media does help us to feel intrigued to learn more and do our own research. I don't really know what's going to come of that, but it just kind of made me think of that, so I wanted to bring it up.
That was brought up in the human trafficking stuff too. So I started to watch stuff, but with my son being home with me, I quickly changed what I chose to watch with him here, and did one of the human trafficking videos. And that was one of the biggest things that they brought up within there, is the impact of media, social media, and dictating who gets to be the victim versus who is the culprit, and looking at so many of these people who have been trafficked in different ways. And a lot of times they can't view themselves as the victim just due to how it's been portrayed within the media and how so much of it is from there. So I think it's big across everything that we could have watched, not just what we've been talking about.
You know, I just wanted to, I was listening and hearing people say that, you know, what can we do? What should we do? And that's a thought-provoking question. Part of what galvanized the civil rights movement in the 50s and early 60s was that whites actually got involved with some of the activities. But prior to that, it was a major struggle. It was a major struggle. But when whites of all walks of life, actors, scientists, clergy, began to become involved and show up to some of the things like the demonstrations, some of them lost their lives in the process, but they started with education and then they moved into action. And so I know that for many of you, especially not knowing your ages, that this may be your first encounters with it. When I did the march after George Floyd died downtown, and something, I remember saying to one of the police officers, no, I'm heading home now. I said, this is not my first rodeo. And I said, the first one was about, what, 40 years ago, 40 something, 50 years ago. And as I was heading toward my car, I thought to myself, why am I still having to demonstrate? I had not realized the big gap in decades. And we were demonstrating the same thing. So, but the one good thing is that this time it wasn't just all Blacks down there demonstrating. It was Black, white, I mean, all professions. And that is what's going to make the difference. I don't know, I'm not advocating for everybody to start demonstrating, but get involved. get involved. If everybody stands against injustice, it will have to crumble. But when just one group fights against it, it's not nearly as powerful. When there's multiple groups that are saying, no, no more, not on our watch. And so I'm saying to you, if you're asking, start with the education, progress into action and into movement. That's what's going to make the difference.
I love that you brought that up, Pat, because I think part of the reason, I'm sorry, Maria.
No, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. But part of the reason that we kind of wanted to do this a little bit more open-ended was because this is what's going to set you guys up. Like, these are the kinds of things that you're going to have to do on your own when you get out in your careers. For those of you who maybe are in grad school now or are, you know, changing careers or whatnot. But these are the things you have to find your people to have these conversations with it. And it sounds like some of you are already doing a really great job of that. But it's not going to end, you know, just because grad school ends. Like, you're going to want to keep these books and these videos and these conversations going. And like Pat's saying, know what's going on in your city where you move, or where, if you stay here, know what's going on at the local level for politics, know what's going on with voting rights, you know, as Andrea was saying. So I think it's really just kind of, hopefully this is an example of just keep these kinds of conversations and activities going in your everyday life, because that's what is the difference between, you know, an OT and a leader OT, or, you know, a family advocate and an all-star family advocate. So sorry, Maria, go ahead.
No, you're fine. Thanks for sharing. I watched the documentary as well, and something that stood out to me was that people acted under the idea that something was true. It wasn't like it was concretely true. So the KKK and the mobs acted under the idea that they did something wrong, or prison security officers or whoever are acting under the idea that these people are criminals and that they will forever be criminals. And I think, Pat, what you said was really insightful. And so going off of that, if we don't actively wrestle with these things or actively investigate or talk to somebody about these ideas, then they are staying ideas and they're not changing. So I really enjoyed this activity. And after, well, actually I was midway through watching it and I felt like just so fired up. I went downstairs and I'm like, Mom, you gotta watch this documentary. And she works in HR, and so she hires people from all walks of life, all different backgrounds. And she told me this story of a woman who had been working with her company, not directly with my mom, but for the company for 18 years. And she ended up quitting her job because of some racial disparity at the workplace. And like we have been saying, that this stuff is happening. It's not in the history books. We are like actively living through that. So yeah, it's just so powerful.
I think to go on what Pat is saying too, we need to make sure that all groups are supporting one group, and that also it goes into some that we're all supporting every group as well, because a lot of this stuff goes into each other, and there's a lot of links between ableism, racism, sexism, homophobia, or things. I mean, even just looking at some of the stuff, and I did the virtual things, I remember from my disability studies classes, and when we did intersectionally about how people trying to run away from slavery were considered to have a mental illness that was like, you know, or how institutionalization was used on people who wouldn't follow gender norms, whether it was women who wanted to work, or there was sort of other things, and how too that can be used in so many different ways. And so being able to make sure that the systems are multifaceted and that we sort of do that, because in some ways, some of the ways that these work is that some of it moves, it seems like some of it moves around. So being able to talk about a lot of it and think about it and sort of see it as interconnected, because even the voting things, a lot of the voting laws or voting laws that are going in are going to disenfranchise so many different groups of people because of the way that voter IDs, or that things aren't ADA accessible, or that they don't have to, that a lot of these things affect multiple groups within it, and being able to sort of have that multiplicity, especially because most people have multiple identities. And one of the things that's tough for some people, especially like within why disability justice started, is because people didn't want to choose between having to choose a disability identity and a Black identity, or a person of color identity, or a sexual orientation identity, because sometimes movements can be sort of linear. Sorry, I don't mean to be on my high horse or anything.
Yeah, so White Fragility was mentioned as a book. And then also I was going to put another one in the chat box that I'd heard about when I did a leadership program a few years ago from one of the Black male doctors at Children's, Black man in a white coat. I'll put it in the, oh wait, maybe I already did, and that's why I got rid of it. I think I did already put it in there, friends. Sorry, I got too many tabs open.
Oh, Unspeakable is really good too. It talks about a Black deaf man in the South, and it goes over the history of sort of like sort of how some of it, like after like Reconstruction, and then sorry, I don't mean to talk too much. Sorry.
Steph, what was the title of the book that you showed at the beginning? Of the one that you have?
Oh, yes. You Are Your Best Thing by Tarana Burke and Brene Brown.
They made a comment in the movie about like leadership within the civil rights movement, and they talked about Fred Hartman, I think that was his name. He was the leader of the Black Panthers at the time and was murdered by the government. It was interesting because he was only 21, which I was like, that's crazy, but he was just obviously had giftings that, you know, he was made to do what he was doing. And he was such a threat because he caught the attention of all different kinds of people. And he had Black people following him and white people following him, and people that otherwise had no like dog in the fight were being caught up because he was saying things that were at that point so radical, but probably just true. And I just thought it was so interesting that he became like a public enemy #1 because he was able to corral groups of people that otherwise weren't on the same page. And I think like there is something in there of being able to get everybody on the same page and moving in the same direction is so crucial. And that's why it was such a threat to this system that was built so wrongly. And that's why the government took action and had this man murdered brutally. But I just think that I don't know if that is helpful for anybody, but it was just something to me where it's like leadership that is able to reach anybody at any time is valuable. I don't know, something like that.
Well, you guys have had great insights and shared some nice resources and seem to have gained some new knowledge. Anybody else have anything else to share?
Jen, I'm reaching out to like all of my fellow parents to ask if any of their school districts have policies or conversations. So I'm gonna research that a little more and get more feedback about that.
Yeah, I'm really curious. Julie, do you know with your kids?
I'm going to go with no, they don't teach it, but I will look into it. And it's funny that this was the topic because I was at a volleyball tournament with one of my kids this weekend, and a mom there, her daughter had to pick her high school. And it was a local high school in Cincinnati, and they did not send their daughter to a high school because they taught that in the high school, that they didn't want her exposed to it. Now, I don't know, the ins and outs of what the high school actually teach. The mom said the reason they chose not to send her there because they taught it was because they taught it very one-sided, and they were teaching the kids, this is just what she said, I have no idea if this is true, that it was they weren't giving both sides of the way of thinking. So that if you didn't buy into the way they were teaching it and you tried to like give your opinion on something else, you weren't heard. That was the mom's take on it. So I do know there are some private high schools teaching this. I don't know about any others. And I would say
Jason,
that
critical race theory is what we were talking about.
Yeah. And most teachers, like really, it's not up to them whether they teach it or not. It's comes from above. So, whoever's the top of your superintendent, and then the board members really decide whether or not it gets taught in a district. So, so I do know that there is a high school teaching it, but I don't know about any others.
I know for me, one of the cool things I've done, and I'm sorry, I missed so much of the conversation, is I've been watching some documentaries, and some of the PBS on like Henry Louis Gates did this like history of like Africa that was really interesting before sort of like colonialization, because we don't usually talk about that. And then there's one I'm watching on also about Native American history before sort of colonialization. I think it's so interesting to learn about different cultures and stuff, and that is sort of not influenced from sort of some of the Western prejudice that came as people were trying to force people to be a certain way, or had prejudiced views of people, and sort of the historical and see sort of history in a sort of different perspective. I mean, not that it takes away or some of this stuff, but I think sometimes it's important to like learn some of the traumas, but also the cultures that were there too, that were that in some way still exist or don't have adapted or have been forced to change in some way. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude again or anything.
No, thanks for sharing, Jason. You're not being rude at all. This is safe space to talk about how you're thinking. And Hank wants to say hello to everyone. I have to share the story real quick because I'm working through some things. Hank and I had a very scary experience last night. Steph already knows the story because I talked to her last night after I was traumatized. He got out of his harness and crossed a major street in Hyde Park, Erie Avenue, and I took off like a mad woman, and I still have like a little cough because I was like, don't run, and B, don't run when it's really cold to get this guy. And yeah, so
How did I miss the transition?
Hank came in, and I just had to disclose because it's on my mind. Yeah.
Gloria
So
did that the other night in Newport. Also,
it scares you to death.
It was horrible.
Oh,
I feel you.
My dog got hit by a car when I was really young. Her name was Cody, and it's really sad. Like,
it's so sad. Like I was watching it like happen, and just we got lucky. that
No, I'm glad both of you are okay, but essentially because people don't always look out for dogs, and so hopefully people want to run over a person, but these sometimes
yeah, they were. If they weren't going to hit him, they were probably going to hit me because I was like right behind them.
Oh, God.
Oh, so anywho, it's been a day. So thanks for letting me share, because that's been heavy on my heart, because he's my baby.
Well, do we want to wrap up with the shout out that I skipped over, the shout out part?
See, Lind loves you.
I have to get him a t-shirt for graduation. He and Easton need a Len
mascot.
Wait, does he like to wear
Len
t-shirts?
mascot.
Because
Len
not all
baby.
dogs like to wear t-shirts. So.
Oh, he has a winter coat, Jason.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so he's good with that stuff. Okay, cool.
Well, I don't know that he's
No,
good with
okay.
it, but
That may have been why he got off his leash yesterday, or his harness.
no, that might have been why he didn't
Does he have
stay
a
in his.
Bengals jersey yet? That is the real question.
What'd you
Does he
say?
have does he have a Bengals jersey yet?
He has a handkerchief.
I love that.
Yeah.
We need photos for next time.
Oh, for sure. And a little football for the game. Yeah, he's ready.
Are others, just really quick before we wrap up, are others Bengals fans? Anybody?
Yeah.
Angel's got her. Okay, awesome.
That's like throwback 90s.
I was gonna say that's like as old as I am pretty sure.
That looks fierce though. I like it.
Yeah, that is
my parents'
fierce.
gear. Yeah. I've worn this for all the playoff games. I'll be wearing it on Sunday.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah.
When I was a kid, I used to call the Bengals the Beagles, which Hank is a beagle.
Aw.
I love that.
You hear that?
I called them the Bungles because that's what my dad called them, because they were always bungling everything, messing up. But now they're not.
Good day.
I like the Valentine's Day decorations you have, Pat.
Thank you. We change our arts and crafts room with each holiday. So
nice.
she makes those, and then we, I don't know if you can see it, we have them hanging from the top to, yeah, she makes it or puts it together. So she gets to change the room with each season.
I love it.
I have a shout out for this week for Kelsey. I just want to say that she was listening to all of my rants last night over text, and I just appreciate her for just being there and just always lending a listening ear. So yeah, love you, Kelsey.
Anytime. Love you, girl.
I had a similar shout out to Kelsey as well, because a couple weeks ago when I had to co-present with Dr. Hunter on the audiology talk, I was super nervous, and she was like so on top of like encouraging words and exactly what I needed to hear that day. So yay, Kelsey.
Thanks, guys.
Dorothy, did you come off mute?
Yes. Sorry about that. It was weird. I wanted to give a shout out to you, actually, Steph, for always being so understanding and flexible about everyone's needs. But I know I've been annoying a little bit, just trying to find some kind of flexibility and another way to do things to try and avoid things that I'm afraid of and not step out of my comfort zone. But so thank you for that. And actually encouraging me to step out of my comfort zone as well. So thank you so much for everything. And I promise to stop being so annoying.
No, you guys are never annoying. Please don't ever feel that. No. You guys always teach us new flexible ways of doing things. So it's always welcome. Always, always, always welcome. Flexibility is the name of the game. But yes, thank you for stepping out of your comfort zone, Elodie.
I think that we all deserve a shout out because everyone was super understanding and vulnerable today. And I feel like this was a hard conversation for me to have and for everyone. So thank you guys for being such a great team.
I agree.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say the same thing, that I'm sure this was uncomfortable for a lot of reasons, but I appreciate the transparency and the willingness to share where you are and how this experience impacted you, especially because it has impacted me for literally decades. And I remember my mom being very concerned where my brother was, especially, we grew up in the generation where we knew where we were not allowed to be after dark. Places like Loveland, Lebanon, Milford, those are places that you got out of there. And so I remember my mom being concerned. That was back before cell phones, and we had the 10-cent payphone. And so you all have shared, and thank you, because I know that you all will carry this ball. You're going to carry it through, and I'm grateful to you for that.
Thanks, Pat. Can we see your granddaughter? Can she wave? Is that her? Hi.
Hello.
I know it's probably overwhelming with all of our hands flying in your face. It's good to see
Wait,
you.
Pat, did she go to the zoo for like Sensory Santa?
I'm sorry, Lucy's trying to get in it too. She did, but my daughter took her.
Yes, I love your daughter. She was so fun.
Yeah, that was her. So, because one of us had to stay here with Lucy, so.
Oh, that makes my heart so happy.
Me too.
Thank everybody for being so accepting of families in this group. It's just seen by Pat and everything. And as my little one joins yet again, I know my older son loves seeing all your faces, and you entertain him just as much as he probably entertained you, but he's so excited. He's like, where are all your friends? I need to see all the people, Mommy. Where are they? So thank you everyone for helping entertain these kids when they're stuck at home with Mommy trying to learn.
Well, I hope you feel better, buddy. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Mama Snuggles.
Yes, Mama Snuggles are the best. Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for leaning into this and sharing and
is today
being
just
willing
Tuesday?
to grow.
Oh, okay, today's just Tuesday. Got 3 more, guys. Got 3 more. Can do this.
Totally do it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see you Thursday for a session with Karen Burkett and Sandy Gruther, who probably Maria and Kelsey are familiar. She's been a giant in the field of speech for a number of decades, but recently retired from the LEND program. But she's going to come back and co-teach on Thursday, and then we'll have our SBM team meetings. So, all right. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.